wide topic under GST. GST in itself is a wide and confusing subject. So in that, this is also another big topic, and none other than Raghavan sir can make it more simpler for us. So we thank you, Raghavan sir, for this session. We are looking forward for it. And so the entire session will go on. First, Raghavan sir will take us through his presentation. He will give all his explanations, and then at the end we will have a question answer session. So question answer session, there will be an option of raise hands in the app. You can use that. Then we can take up one by one. We can take up questions one by one. In between, if you have any queries, you can just send it to me personally in the chat box, so that if required and if time permits, we can take up the questions in between, but we will try not to take as many as questions that time. But during the question answer round, we will definitely try to take up as many questions as possible. So thank you once again, and we look forward to Raghavan sir's session now. Raghavan sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Prithvi, and thank you, our own bar, for giving me this opportunity to talk.
So your voice is not audible, sir.
Yeah, is it audible now?
Not really. 1 minute, sir. Yes, sir. Sir?
Yeah, is it audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Perfect now. We can start.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Very good evening, all of you, and thanks, Prithvi, and thanks, our bar, for inviting me again to talk. In fact, this is one of my favorite topic. In fact, when Mr. A.P. Srinivas was asking me any other topic, I volunteered to speak on this topic. And while I have volunteered on this, I felt it was an act of bravery, because I'm going to talk before a very well-educated and informed crowd. And after having said this, when I was thinking about who else from our bar could have spoken on this better than me, at least 10 to 15 names flashed immediately in my mind. Like I don't want to name all of them, but in this bar is a very well learned bar. So, and that too, this topic is a topic which is settled by several judicial decisions. And Madras High Court has been a pioneer in bringing this law to some level. So therefore, I felt I was a bit unthoughtful to have opted for this. But having taken this, I cannot back out. So I thought, let me try and make my best effort to convey whatever I wanted to convey. This topic, works contract, is, as we all know, is a topic of great interest. Particularly, it has been an extremely important topic from the time the sales tax was being levied. There are law commission reports on it. There are select committee reports on it. Taxation Inquiry Commission has specifically dealt with this. And finally, there has been constitutional amendment on this. Subsequently, any law, it will give a specific treatment to works contract, be it service tax, be it GST, be it value added tax. And we have this subject has seen constitutional bench decisions. So it's an extremely important topic. Lot of amendments, lot of judicial interventions have happened on this topic. But the best part is it still remains relevant. That's the best part of it. It is still remaining relevant for the only reason that it's a complicated topic. When I thought I will deal with this topic, it occurred to me that it's humanly impossible to complete the entire topic in one session or two sessions. I then thought maybe it can take 3 sessions, but today I feel it can even take 4 sessions. But we cannot keep extending it. We have to compress it and present it in a form which does not occupy the time which is allotted to others. So therefore, I would try to finish it, say, within a maximum of 3 to 4 sessions, which I'm not sure as of now. The part 1, which I'm going to deal with today, is only till the 46th Constitutional Amendment, which happened, wherein a clause relating to works contract was inserted in the definition clause of the Constitution. So today, our discussion will stop with the constitutional amendment which was brought in. So let us first see the history and evolution of works contract. What is work? What is works? Is work and works one and the same? Is it a work contract or is it a works contract? If it is a works contract, works, is it just a plural form of work? These are all issues which were troubling me, maybe elementary for many of you, but it was troubling me, and I want to understand what is should when the phrase works contract comes, should I understand works first? Should I understand contract next? And then should I marry these two to have a full understanding of works contract? Is this the approach which I should adopt? These were things which were troubling me. And when I started looking up the judicial dictionaries and various other dictionaries on the meaning of work and the meaning of works, this is what I get. Work is a physical and mental exertion to attain an end, especially as controlled by and for the benefit of an employer. This is work. So whatever we understand as labor, whatever we understand as work, that is this. On the other hand, works is referring to a mill, a factory, or other establishment for manufacturing or other industrial purposes, a manufacturing plant, any building or structure on land. So the term works gives an impression that it is talking about certain structures. These are talking about buildings. These are talking not of the labor, but the outcome of labor in the form of immovable property. So therefore, works and work seem to be having completely different connotations. And what we are dealing with today is not work contract, but it's a works contract. So it seems it has something to do with the green part of the slide which I have just projected. If you also see the various judicial dictionaries, we know contract, we of course know, we have our own Indian Contract Act also, which definition of contract is also in similar lines than like what you see here. So it is an agreement between two or more parties creating obligations that are enforceable in law. Works contract, a popular understanding is that these are contracts between parties to construct any building or structure on land. It is popularly referred to as a building contract or engineering contract. So this is what works contract means. There is a book by Hudson. Hudson's book on building contracts is a very important, very interesting book. It contains a lot of details about building contracts and how building contracts are seen and how the building contracts are treated internationally by various legislations across the world. So when it comes to building contracts, Hudson defines a building contract as a building or engineering contract may be defined as an agreement under which a person undertakes for a reward to carry out for another person works of a building of civil engineering character. So this is what it says. So therefore, this is about building contracts. If you see the earlier one, works contract is popularly referred to as building contract, engineering contract. So all these things, and also we know the meaning of works. Works also talk about some structure on land. So from works, if I understand works as a structure on land, to the dictionary meaning of works contract is generally something relating to structure on land. And then ultimately, when you see what a building contract is, this also talks about a works of a building of civil engineering nature. From these things, we understand the normal meaning of the word works contract. It seems it usually only refers to construction agreements or construction of structure, etc. Is something to do with immovable property, which is of civil engineering character. So this is what seems to be the usual understanding of works contract. So, but a works contract seems to be different from a contract for work. So when we say contract for work and when we say works contract, let us assume that we are all in a pre-constitution scenario where the problem of works contract has still not entered our lives. During that period, if I say works contract or if I say contract for work, it seems these two have completely different connotations. Works contract is a contract relating to building of some immovable property, but contract of work denotes a contract for labor. So these two, contract for work and works contract, do not seem to be synonymous at all. And of course, contract of sale is also a term which we need to understand during the course of this discussion. So these are all distinct concepts is what we understand at this stage. While this is the situation, what happened is across jurisdictions in different countries, several disputes arose relating to taxation of works contract. In fact, if you see mainly Australia and also US, many disputes arose and many judgments also came to be passed, like you see Sydney Hydraulic and General Engineering Company, which is a Supreme Court of New South Wales. Hornibrook is an extremely important judgment by the Supreme Court of New South Wales against Australia. Blohm & Co. and Hurley Mid-Continent are all of US Supreme Courts, Supreme Court in US, namely state of Illinois. In all these judgments, the subject matter was taxation of construction contracts and treating them as sale of goods. This is the central point in all these decisions. If you see, let us take Australia first. If you see Sydney Hydraulic, the question was whether a transaction for execution of certain work and supply of certain materials is liable to sales tax. So to decide that, what should we see? Section 3, subsection 4 of the Commonwealth Act, which was what was administering sales tax there, that defines it, the taxable event as this. Sales tax is imposed at the rate of 2.5% upon the sale value of goods manufactured in India by a taxpayer, sold by him, or applied to his own use. So here again, the tax was on the sale value of goods which are manufactured by a taxpayer and sold. The court held that as the agreement was only to do certain work and use of some material for execution, there was no agreement for sale of goods. Tax would not be leviable in respect of those transactions. So here is the first decision where they say that the agreement here is for doing some work, therefore it cannot be taxed as contract of sale. Then came the Hornibrook's decision. Before Hornibrook came, after Sydney Hydraulic, the provision in the Commonwealth Act was amended, section 3.4. What was done was, the following insertion was made. If you see, it is extremely important. The insertion will say, for the purpose of this act, a person shall be deemed to have sold goods in the performance of any contract, not being the contract for sale of goods, under which he has received or entitled to receive valuable consideration. He supplies goods, the property in which, whether as goods or in some other form, passes under the terms of the contract to some other person. So this is very important. This says, there shall be deemed to be sale of goods where a person supplies goods, the property of which is passing to another person in terms of the contract, whether as goods or in some other form. This seems to be the mother of the amendments which India has seen subsequently. So this amendment was made, and the issue before the court there was whether a contractor who has fabricated piles and used them in constructing a bridge was liable to sales tax. So the piles were, of course, manufactured, maybe fabricated at site, and then it was used in construction. So in that case, whether that piles, before it is incorporated into the land, can it be treated as sale of goods, and whether sales tax can be levied on that or not. The court held that sales tax would be leviable under the amended section. Even if there is a supply of goods under contract in any form, sale would be liable to tax. So it may be in any other form. The piles may not have been transferred in the form of movables. The ownership in the piles might have been transferred as part of the land in the form of immovable, but still, since the amended definition takes care of whether as goods or in some other form, the court held that this would be liable to tax under Sale of Goods Act because of the amended definition. While this being so, in Australia, what happened in US? In US, provision similar to unamended 3.4 of Australia was there. So when the issue came up, the very same issue of construction of building came up, the court held that it will amount to sale of the material component in the construction contract. But subsequently, another judgment of the same Supreme Court overruled the earlier case and held that there is no transfer of title to the materials used in construction work as goods. That is the most important point. There may be transfer of ownership on the materials which is used in the construction contract, but such transfer of ownership is not happening as goods, and therefore it was held that the provisions of Sales Tax Act has no application. This was what was held by the US. This was the international position during that point in time. Then what happened in India? In India, during that time, we had the Government of India Act, which was before the Constitution. Government of India Act 1935 also had similar schedules as we have entered the Constitution, and entry 48 in list 2 of the Government of India Act dealt with taxes on sale of goods and on advertisements. State of Madras enacted the Madras General Sales Tax Act, which is excising the field of legislation provided for under entry 48. Under the Madras General Sales Tax Act, the word sale was defined, and sale was defined as every transfer of property in goods by one person to another in the course of trade or business for cash or for deferred payment or any other valuable consideration. This is extremely important. It says every transfer of property in goods by one person to another. Let us stop here. What is transfer? What is property? What is goods? These are the most important questions which have to be answered while understanding this. Transfer, we all know. Transfer means I give, someone takes. It's a simultaneous relinquishment by me and acquisition by somebody else. That's the meaning of transfer. Transfer means a simultaneous relinquishment and a simultaneous acquisition. I relinquish, you acquire. That means I have transferred to you. Transfer can be of anything. Transfer can be of possession. Transfer can be of mere custody. So transfer can be anything. It can be of ownership also. What is covered is transfer. Of what? The provision says ownership. Sorry, provision doesn't say ownership. It says property. It says transfer of property in goods. What is property? What is the meaning of the term property? Property here is used in the sense of right, not in the sense of the asset. So therefore here transfer of property means, in fact, if you see the Sale of Goods Act, the same transfer of property in goods is treated as sale under the Sale of Goods also, and the word property is defined under the Sale of Goods Act, and it will say property means general property and not mere special property, and not mere special property. So property means general property. General property means ownership. Special property means something short of ownership. Like for example, hypothecation or a pledge or a mortgage. These things, actually there is only transfer of possession, but there is no transfer of ownership. These are all special properties. A hypothecation creates a special property. When the goods are hypothecated, that will also be transfer of property. It will be transfer of property in goods. But the property which is transferred there is not general property of ownership, but a special property. That is alone is transferred there. That's why Sale of Goods Act found it important to define the term property, and it would say property means general property and not special property. And because the word property is susceptible to such different meanings, what would have done is, if you see any value added tax enactment or any sales tax enactment, particularly you can take Tamil Nadu also, all these enactments in the sale definition would have specifically said, but does not include mortgage, pledge or hypothecation. They would specifically say that. That is only to show away any doubts we have on the understanding of the meaning of property, to put it beyond doubt that the property here means ownership. The definitions of sale would have specifically excluded mortgage, pledge or hypothecation. They would have done that. So therefore, what is covered under the definition of sale is only transfer of ownership over the goods. Then, while the Act was of 1939, Madras General Sales Tax Act, it was amended in 1947. In 1947, the definition of sale was amended, to include over and above the normal sale, it also said any transfer of property in goods involved in the execution of a works contract. So this was the first time what Madras did was they deemed a transfer of ownership in goods in the execution of works contract also as a sale. And having said this, having used the phrase works contract, they had to necessarily define it. So works contract was also defined under the Act, and it said any agreement for carrying out for cash or for deferred payment or for any other valuable consideration, construction, fitting out, improvement, repair of building, road, bridge, or other immovable property. Stop here, and it says or the fitting out, improvement, or repair of any movable property. So works contract till this date was understood as something to do with immovable buildings. For the first time, Madras General Sales Tax Act defined the term works contract. Till that stage, it was not a defined term. It was only generally understood. When it is generally understood, it was applied only to immovable structures. For the first time, it was defined. And while defining it, it expanded the meaning of the word works contract to include contracts relating to movable property also, namely the fitting out, improvement of, or repair of movable property. This was the amendment which was carried out in 1947 by the Madras General Sales Tax Act. So for the first time, there was a category of deemed sale, deeming works contract also as a sale. And what was taxed in that? Here we have to be very careful. What they wanted to tax is not the entire works contract. Though they defined works contract, what was taxed or what they purported to tax was only the transfer of property in goods involved in the execution of works contract. So if there is a works contract which would involve some materials and it would also involve labor, what was taxed is only that portion of the contract which would involve transfer of ownership in the goods. So that alone was subject to tax during that point in time. This amendment and this meaning of sale came to be challenged in the case of Gannon Dunkerley. This is popularly called as the first Gannon Dunkerley case. In this case, the assessee challenged it and he was successful before the Madras High Court. And the department came up to the Supreme Court and the matter was heard by the Supreme Court. What were the facts in the case? In this case, clearly it was not a contract with respect to movables. It was a contract with respect to immovables only. It was a construction contract. It was a building contract for roads, dams, and other works. Department wanted to tax the value of materials used in execution of such contract as sale of goods. Madras High Court held in favor of assessee, saying that it cannot be taxed. They struck down the amendment, saying that it is ultra vires, the Constitution, the Government of India, and also they referred to entry 54. They struck it down. Then assessee challenged the virus of the amendments. In the touchstone of 48, it was held in favor of the assessee. State of Madras carried it before the Supreme Court. Since it had wide ramifications, many states also joined in the matter and all were heard together by the Supreme Court. The assessee's contention was whatever is transferred in the course of execution of a works contract, assessee contended that that cannot be taxed as sale of goods. Is the screen visible to all? I get some chat saying that it is not fully visible.
No, sir, it is coming fully.
Fully. Okay. Okay. Then I will continue.
Your screen size, participants. You can zoom it and then you can fit it to your screen size also.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. So here the assessee argued that works contract cannot be treated as sale of goods for the purpose of entry 48. Here you have to be, I have to tell you that it's very, very interesting to note that before the Government of India Act, before the 1935 Act, there was a white paper which was published on what all to be taxed under sales tax. There they said sales tax should be levied like a turnover tax. There has to be sales tax, or a turnover tax, and they didn't say it should be only on goods. But subsequently, when the act was actually passed, the levy was restricted, confined only to sale of goods. In other words, under the white paper, interpretation was possible to say that tax can be levied on services also. In fact, subsequently, in 1954-55, there was a Taxation Inquiry Commission report. In the Taxation Inquiry Commission report suggested few changes to the Constitution, particularly entry 54 also. The Taxation Inquiry Commission report says that tax should be levied on all sales. And more importantly, the report specifically said there can be sale of services. So therefore, whenever we say sale, we normally associate the word sale as only relatable to goods. We always say sale means always goods, service means not related to goods. But it doesn't seem to be so. The understanding during that point in time, at least, has been different. They would say sale of goods will be taxed, sale of services can also be there, but they say it will be extremely difficult to administer. They will say for two reasons we are not trying to tax sale of services. Number one, it is administratively extremely difficult to administer them, to tax them, that two interstate elements are involved. Therefore, service, it is difficult to identify whether it is interstate or local, etc. Therefore, the committee report will say, let us not tax services. It will also say, in any case, the difficulty in administration as compared with the potential revenue which it will earn is very, very less. Therefore, for that reason also, let us not tax sale of services. This is what specifically was said in the Taxation Inquiry Commission report. You can go and check. It will be in chapter 3 of the 54-55 report. There is a detailed discussion on whether to tax sale of services or not. And having said this, they would say, therefore, let us restrict the tax only to sale of goods. Let us not try to tax sale of services. They would also say in that newspaper will be with the center. In case sale of newspaper and the advertisements which are published in the newspaper is with the center. So let the center decide whether they want to tax or not. Insofar, am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
So I was saying that
You can start sharing a screen again, sir.
yes. So I was saying that under the Taxation Inquiry Commission report, they tried to tax sale of services also, but the committee said there was a discussion on taxation of sale of services, and they said that let us not tax it now. There is not much revenue involved in it. So eventually they said the tax will be only on sale of goods. So whenever we say sale, because of these discussions, we should always say sale of goods. We should not say only sale. It is sale of goods is the subject matter of the sales tax enactments. So when the Government of India Act was enacted in 1935, the expression sale of goods was already a term of well-recognized legal import. That is, sale of goods is defined under the Sale of Goods Act. And that Sale of Goods Act preceded the Government of India Act. So 1930 Sale of Goods Act was already there. It's a general law dealing with sale of goods, and therefore the 1935 Act, when they used the term sale of goods, they intended to have the same meaning as is assigned to it under the Sale of Goods Act. This was the argument of the SC. If the sale of goods, the entry which uses the phrase sale of goods should be understood in light of the Sale of Goods Act, then the amendment in the Madras General Sales Tax Act, which tries to tax a works contract, the transfer of ownership portion in works contract, was argued to be ultra vires. Works contract cannot be a sale as understood in the Sale of Goods Act, because for two reasons. The SC argued, once I say sale and I say sale of goods, then ownership in the goods should be passed as goods. If I sell a mobile phone to you, it should pass as mobile phone only to you. It should pass as goods. It should pass in the same form. So chattel qua chattel is what is said in the English laws. So thing should be given as a thing, then only it becomes a sale. But when a thing is transferred not as a thing, but as an immovable property, then the test of chattel qua chattel is not satisfied. That is, brick may be movable, but when the brick is placed on the land belonging to the buyer, then till the time it is placed on the land, the brick is the property of the builder. Once it is placed on the land, by accretion to the land, by an addition to the land, it becomes the property of the landowner. So in what form is the ownership in brick is transferred to the buyer? The ownership in brick is transferred to the landowner stroke buyer in the form of immovable property. It is not transferred as brick, but it is transferred as part of the land. Therefore, the assessee argued that it cannot be taxed at all. The
So,
second
sir, I'm
import-
sorry to
Yes.
interrupt, sir. So your
Yes.
screen is not on. I think your screen sharing is turned off. Can you just put it back again, sir?
My screen sharing. Okay, sorry. Shall I?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You can make it full screen and then.
Yes. Am I visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You have to make it
Just
full
one
screen though.
second. Is it
Yes,
clear?
sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So therefore, when the brick is sold as a brick and when it gets transferred to the buyer in the same form, it would be a sale. But when the brick is placed on a land and because it is attached to the land by means of that attachment, it becomes the property of the landowner, then brick is not sold as a brick. It is sold as part and parcel of immovable property. Therefore, the assessee argued that that cannot be covered under the Sale of Goods Act. This was the argument placed by the assessee. And the department argued like this. Department said, expression sale of goods, where does it feature under the Government of India Act, or where does it feature in the Constitution? This expression features in entry 48, and entry 48 gives the fields of legislation. So when it is giving the fields of legislation, it is a settled law. Even during that time, it is a settled law that when you interpret the fields of legislation, it should be given the widest possible interpretation. It should be given a very liberal construction. Therefore, you should try to put in as much things as possible, which that entry can accommodate. So therefore, the department argued that this is not an expression used in the statute. This is an expression used in entry 48 of list 2. It is giving down the fields of legislation. Therefore, it has to receive a liberal construction. This is the first argument which they placed. If such liberal construction is to be given, then it cannot be confined to the definition under the Sale of Goods Act. It should be understood as generally understood in trade. So therefore, the government argued that we should not restrict it to the meaning given under the Sale of Goods Act. Once you rule out the application of the definition under Sale of Goods Act, then the department argued that the goods need not be transferred in the form of goods. So long as there is transfer of ownership, it will be taxed. Therefore, it should not be left out from the taxation. It was also argued that state has the complete power to take one agreement and split it in as many parts and only give a treatment to that part of the contract which involves a transfer of ownership in goods. So therefore, it was argued that the government has the power to single out that portion of from a single entire indivisible contract, that portion which relates to transfer of ownership in goods, and then they have the power to tax it. These were the broad contentions put forth by the department. As Mr. Sridharan was telling, I was narrating today, that if we have to deal with all aspects of Gann and Dunkerley, then that itself will take more than one session. So therefore, I'm just restricting ourselves to the important parts of Gann and Dunkerley. So with all these submissions in place, the question came before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court had to decide on the following questions. One is, what is the meaning which should be ascribed to the phrase Sale of Goods Act in entry 48 of the Government of India Act or entry 54 of the Constitution? So sale of goods, what should be the meaning given to it? Being a term which is employed in the Constitution, that too in the fields of legislation, should it be liberally construed or should it be given the same meaning as under the Sale of Goods Act? That is the second question. Next, what is meant by sale of goods as such? Should the ownership be transferred in the same form as goods, or the contract can be split to tax only the goods portion? Does the government have the power to do this? So these were the various questions which the court had to decide. The court held like this. The expression sale of goods, which is featuring in entry 48, is a nomen juris. Nomen juris means it's a word of definite legal connotation. So it's not a normal word which you and I use in normal trade. It has a legal meaning which is attached to it. And that meaning is only the meaning which is given to it under the Sale of Goods Act. Its essential ingredient, once you say that it is the same meaning as is given to it under the Sale of Goods Act, the essential ingredients of it is the agreement to sell movables for a price. It should be an agreement to sell movables for a price, and property therein should actually pass pursuant to that agreement. So mere agreement is not sufficient. Once an agreement is put in place, once a price is fixed, so a gratuitous act cannot amount to a sale of goods. Once there is an agreement to sell movables, and that is for a price, and actually the ownership in those goods transfers, then only it will become Sale of Goods Act. This is what the court held. And while saying it, the court also said there should be a consensus ad idem as to the subject matter of sale. There cannot be an agreement relating to one kind of property and a sale as regards another. So if I say that I will sell so and so model of laptop, let us say I will sell you Lenovo model of laptop, then I cannot sell something else. There should be a complete consensus, complete understanding, complete agreement between the seller and buyer as to the exact identity of the item which is to be sold. It can be relating to the identity, or it can be relating to the quantity, it can be relating to measure, it can be anything. But what is to be sold should not be left to any vagaries. So therefore it's extremely important that there is a consensus item as to what is the subject matter of sale. The court also held that there can be divisible contracts, there can be indivisible contracts. In a divisible contract, there are actually two contracts, but which is embodied in a single document, what we call as agreement. So you can say I have only one agreement, but in that agreement, if there is a portion relating to sale of goods and there is an independent portion relating to services, and if the sale of goods portion of the contract and the service portion of the contract are not intertwined, one does not depend on the other, and then though these both are put in the same document, still these should be construed as two different contracts. This is an extremely important finding. In other words, the court said that what is a contract should not be determined by the form in which it is presented. It may be presented in a single document, say of 50 pages. Just because the sale is also happening within that 50 pages and service is also happening within that 50 pages doesn't mean that it is an indivisible contract. So the question as to divisibility or indivisibility should flow from the contractual obligations, the obligations which is performed under the contract, and not by the mere documentation. So the document can be single, a single document can embody two contracts, or there may be two different documents which we might have entered, but if one document is dependent on and refers to the other, though it is entered into in two different documents, both should be seen as single indivisible contract. So the divisibility or indivisibility is not in the form of the agreement. In fact, the divisibility or indivisibility is also not on the consideration. It depends purely on the obligations which are entered between the parties. So therefore, here the court held that if the contract is divisible and there are two agreements embodied in a single instrument, state can separate the agreement to sell from the agreement to do work, and they can impose the tax on the sale component. So this is what the court held. The court held that divisibility or not, you should not decide only based on the instrument in which it is embodied, it is written, but you should go by the actual obligations between the parties. Having said this, the court also held that property here means ownership. Ownership in goods used in works contract would become the property of the customer by way of accretion. So in a works contract, the ownership gets transferred by way of accretion. They also refer to the maxim, quick it, planted, or solo said it. What it means is whatever is affixed to the ground belongs to the ground. Thus, there is no sale of goods, chattel qua chattel. So what the court held is, what is placed on the ground, if the land belongs to somebody, if you put your goods on my land, then that item which you have put on my land will also become my property. But the court was very, very conscious in saying that this maxim is applicable in India only with exceptions. It is not, in fact, they also take the example of Mysore Chromate and other decisions where they say in India, the concept of dual ownership is recognized. That is, you may be the owner of the land, you may lease the land to me, and on the land, I may put up my construction. I can be the owner of the constructed property and you can be the owner of the land, which was not possible under the English law. In England, it was not possible. If your land, if on your land I put up my building, then automatically that building also belongs to you. I cannot say I am the owner of the building, you are the owner of the land. That was not possible under the English law. But in Indian law, it was well recognized. So therefore, I can be the owner of building, you can be the owner of land. So that was quite possible. So they said that is therefore, wherever there are contracts where the landowner has permitted the other person to put up the property, then the concept of accretion will not apply. But wherever the other person has not agreed, then where by agreement we have to determine whether it is a works contract or not. So for sale, property should pass on as movables, goods as goods, and absent these two conditions, it was held not to be a sale. So this was what broadly was held by Gann and Dunkerley. What do we understand from this decision? It's very, very important. What are the important takeaways from the first Gann and Dunkerley? It is this. Sale of goods, even in the context of constitution, will only have the same meaning under Sale of Goods Act. This is such a rare case where constitution borrows the definition from a legislation. So the sale of goods, which is a term employed in the constitution, should be understood in the same context and meaning as is there already in a pre-existing legislation like Sale of Goods Act. Number one. Number two, for sale, there should be transfer of property for a price, consensus addendum as to the identity of the goods, goods should be passed as goods, and goods, the ownership cannot be passed as immovables. These are all the various tests for sale. These were held by Gann and Dunkerley. Now, with this Gann and Dunkerley in mind, what I have done, what I have tried to do today is various decisions had come applying Gann and Dunkerley. The most important of them actually will fall in these four buckets. One is those cases relating to erection installation contracts, the other set relating to bodybuilding contracts for buses and trucks and railway wagons, etc. Next is contract for work and labor, pure work and labor contracts, packing contracts, job works, etc. Then four is printing contracts. Printing will also take photography in its ambit, maybe painting, etc. So all those things will come under printing contracts. I'm going to analyze these four types of the decisions falling under these four types of contracts. First is erection installation. Carstel GmbH is an important decision on this point. Here, there was a German company which is a contractor. They entered into a lump sum contract with Indian company. So it was a lump sum contract with the Indian company for supply, assembly, and installation of coke oven battery plant. Contract stipulated that goods should become the property of the customer at the moment the goods enter the customer's property. However, Contractor will only be responsible if the goods are lost, stolen, injured, destroyed. This is a very peculiar kind of contract. One part of the contract will say that goods will become the property of the customer the moment it enters customer's property. But if the goods are lost, stolen, etc., then contractor will only be responsible and not the customer. Excuse me. The issue was because this clause is there, whether Gannon Deckerley can still be applied to it or not. So basically, the court had to decide when the transfer of proper ownership actually happens. The court held that the clause is incorporated only to ensure that materials of the right sort were used in the construction. The whole intention was not to carry out a separate sale of the goods used in the contract. The intention is only to ensure that the goods which are destined to this project are not diverted and materials of substandard quality materials are not used in the contract. So with this, the court held that this clause will not have a huge impact in understanding the nature of contract, and therefore the court held that the contract is a single indivisible contract for works, and said the clause expressly provides that any loss would fall not on the contractor. Risk is still with the German company only. Hence, there is no separate sale contract. The court therefore held it's a works contract. This is important because still sometimes these kind of clauses still appear in the contract, and that gives us a doubt on whether this is a works contract or not. Court held that still these are works contract only. So therefore, just because there is one peculiar clause in the contract, we should not get colored totally by it. We should see the object with which that clause is incorporated. If that object is still in line with the broad nature of the contract, then we should go with the nature of the contract and not get influenced only by those peculiar clauses. Next is Richardson and Kruddas. In this case, there was no formal contract. There were two kinds of work which were rendered. One is fabrication, supply and erection of steel structures for a sugar factory. Next is fabrication, installation of bottle cooling plant. Lump sum consideration was agreed to. Of course, there is no formal contract, but one sees the correspondences, it was there. Whether there is sale of materials distinct and separate from the service portion or not is the question for both the work which is being undertaken. So fabrication, supply, is it separate from erection or is it part and parcel of erection was the question. Here again the court reiterated. They said that to constitute sale, revenue needs to prove. The onus is on the revenue because this is taxability. The revenue has to prove that there has been a consensus item to the sale of specific goods. Transfer of ownership has to take place. Consideration should have been paid for the sale of such specific goods. Under a contract for work and labor, this is an extremely important sentence. Under a contract for work and labor, which we usually call as service contracts, even if transfer of property occurs as an accessory, it still remains to be a contract for work and labor. Predominant intention is what to be seen. This is the first time the court held here that there can be service contracts in which there can be an incidental transfer of ownership happening over the goods. In that case, court held that you have to see what is the predominant intention. The court also said that merely because bills are separately issued for value of goods and labor cannot lead to a conclusion or an assumption that there are two separate contracts. This is also extremely important. Many a times we commit this mistake where we say that separate bills are issued for goods portion and therefore it is a divisible contract. So divisibility should not be judged from the milestones. Divisibility should not be judged from whether it is a lump sum contract or a separate separate consideration. It should also not be judged from the manner in which the invoice is raised. We have to see only the obligation which is created under the contract. If the obligation of supplying goods and providing services is intertwined, so much so that one cannot exist without the other, then it becomes an indivisible contract. So this is also a classical case which says that merely because you raise an invoice in one manner, I will not get influenced by the way you raise invoice. I will still see what is the essence of the contract. Next is Nenuram. While saying this, I have skipped many judgments in between. I am only taking through those decisions which are path breaking. So in Nenuram, supplying and fixing wooden windows and doors together with frames in the buildings which is being constructed. Windows had also thereafter to be painted. Single rate agreed for supplying and fixing the wooden items. Whether there are two contracts, one for sale of movable chattels, other for service and labor to fix the chattels, whether the sale of movable chattels is liable to tax or not. So this is again the same question which has arisen. So, am I visible and audible?
Yes, sir. We can hear you now, sir. You can again start sharing the screen, sir.
Yes, I'll do that. Shall I?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So in Nenuram, the question was similar. It was also a contract where there was a single consideration, single rate agreed for this supply and installation of windows and doors together with frames. There the court held that the idea was to sell the goods as part and parcel of the building which is being constructed, and therefore it is a single indivisible contract for both supply and fixing. Therefore, they held that sales tax is not leviable on that, because during that time, sales tax was levied only on classical sales, that is the sale simpliciter, the outright sale transactions. So therefore, while saying this, they also followed another decision of MAN Industrial. Vanguard shutters, by this time, lot of decisions had come on what is sale, whether some contract is sale or contract for work, etc. Lot of judgments had come by this time. And again, the court had to deal with a contract to fabricate the rolling shutters and bring them to site and erect them, whether it will amount to a works contract or not. In all these cases, I'm sorry, we are getting constant interruptions today.
Sir, is your internet seems to be fine only?
I don't know. I will continue wasting more time. Yeah. So you want to?
Or you want to just log out quickly and come back again? Restart it. No.
Let's see if there is more interruption. We'll see. Huh?
All right, sir.
Yep.
Screen sharing again, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So in Nenuram, again the same question came up, and the question was whether, in Vanguard, same question came up, and the court had to decide. Here again, there was a lump sum consideration, and rolling shutters, supply and fixing of rolling shutters was the issue, and the court had to decide on whether it is sale or contract for works. Here again, the court held the contract was indivisible. It was a continuous contract. He cannot come, deliver the shutter at the place, and then he cannot just go away like that. It was a continuous contract involving fabrication and its actual fitting at the premises. It was completed only when the erection of the shutters was complete. So therefore, certain materials which are not merely supplied but fixed to an immovable property so as to become a permanent fixture and accretion to said property, the contract prima facie would be a work. I do not know if it's a feature of Zoom or something to do with my system or whatever. Am I audible?
Sir, we can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Yeah, I'll continue. I'm sorry for the constant interruptions. I do not know.
No problem.
Why it is happening. So this judgment was subsequently followed in Sentinel rolling shutter also. And in fact, while dealing with Vanguard, the court held that it's a very vexed question. It has come up several times. There is no single test. We cannot say this is how you have to determine whether a contract is for sale of goods or contract is for work and labor. You have to apply it for each and every case. This was held by the court in this judgment. This is what, as I say, Sentinel rolling shutters, they said there is no straitjacket test or formula. The difficulty lies not in listing out theoretically the tests for sale and service. That is not the difficulty. But to apply it in each and every case to say where that particular case falls in the factual matrix of each and every particular case. The primary test, the foremost test, is to ascertain the main object of the parties. That can be gathered from the terms of the contract. So main object is nothing but the dominant intention which we all talk about today. So this judgment also said you have to see, to decide whether a contract is for work and labor or whether a contract is for sale of goods. You have to see what is the dominant intention involved in the contract. If the dominant intention is for the supply of goods and where service is incidental, then you can say that it is predominantly a sale contract. So therefore, we have to apply the dominant intention test to each and every contract. It also says contract whose main object is to transfer the property in goods as goods and service is merely incidental, it will be treated as a contract of sale, whereas a contract of work involving some materials will be contract of work and labor. So sometimes there can be a largely service contract that might involve some materials in it. Then in that case, applying the dominant intention test, that will be treated as a contract for work and it will not be treated as sale contract. True nature of the contract cannot depend on the mode of payment. Extremely important. This is what Sentinel rolling shutter says. So these are all cases involving erection installation. Next type of contract is contract for service versus contract of sale. Classical case is Guntur tobacco. In this case, the assessee carries out the process of re-drying of tobacco. So the tobacco belongs to the customer. Customer gives the tobacco to the assessee. Assessee has to do some process called re-drying the tobacco. To maintain the moisture content in the tobacco leaf in the process of re-drying, it is packed using a waterproof container. That waterproof container belongs to the assessee, that is Guntur tobacco. So customer gives only the leaf for re-drying. After the re-drying is done, to retain some moisture content in it, the assessee had to do a special packing on it, which is a waterproof container. So the tobacco is returned to the customer along with the container. For this container, the contract does not stipulate a separate amount as consideration. So the question now is whether this container portion can be treated as sale of goods or not. There the court held that re-drying process could not be completed without the use of the container, which is packing material. It formed an integral part of the service. There is no intention to sell the container. The container which is given is incidental to the larger contract of service. There is transfer of ownership happening, and transfer of ownership is happening on the goods, namely the container. There is no doubt. This is a contract. This involves goods. There is a transfer of ownership in goods. There is no doubt. But that alone is not sufficient. If you want to tax it as a sale, the revenue has to establish that there was a sale distinct from the contract of work and labor. So therefore, just because in some contract, incidentally, some ownership gets transferred is not proof enough to say that it is a sale contract. This is the majority view of the judges. The dissenting view said the packing material remained distinct from the dried tobacco. Property in it passed to the customer who had paid for it. On the basis of the practice obtaining in the industry, contract of sale arose easily by implication. So this is a dissenting view. This view is still not a valid law. So therefore, we should stick to the majority view. Next comes Purushottam Premji. This is again a very, very important case. In this case, what happened was the assessee breaks the stones from quarries belonging to railways. So the quarry belongs to the railways. He goes and breaks the stones from it. The stones are broken into pieces. It was converted into ballast of a specific size, thereafter supplied back to the railways. So railway has the quarry. I go there, break the stones, break it to proper sizes and supply it back to them. Assessee was required to remove the rejected ballast from the railway property, royalty deducted by railways while making payment of consideration. Whether the consideration received for this activity of breaking the ballast is liable to sales tax or not is the question. The court held that the quarries belong to railways. When there is no transfer of property involved, there is no question of levy of sales tax. This is important because the quarry always belonged to the railways. I was just permitted to mine out the stones. So by that process, I don't become the owner of that. So the property on those stones still vests with the railways only. I take it out, I break it, and I give it back to the railways. So as such, there is no transfer of ownership happening between me and the railways. So therefore, the court held it cannot be taxed at all under sales tax. While saying this, they lay down these tests. See, the test for contract for work or service, they say like this. No property is transferred in the goods produced as a whole during performance of the contract, notwithstanding that a part or even the whole of the materials used by him may have been his property. This is important. No property is transferred in the goods produced as a whole during the performance of the contract, notwithstanding the part or even the whole of the materials used by him may have been his property. So therefore, if I'm the job worker, I may be using some items for doing some work. But if the property in those items is not getting passed, then it cannot be treated as a sale. It will still remain as a contract for work or service. On the other hand, if you see a contract for sale of goods, property produced as a whole has individual existence and belongs to the transferor until delivery. Title passes under a contract specific to that goods for a price. So this is extremely important. In fact, I feel this test will be useful in arguing all software cases also, which I will explain separately. But what this means is, suppose I tell the supplier that you manufacture a beautiful sofa for me. So I don't give any goods. The carpenter has his own materials. I give just the specifications. I want like this, etc. He makes the sofa. It's a beautiful sofa. It has come out well. Now, while doing it, he was thinking he will give it to me. But he ended up like a masterpiece. The carpenter has never made such sofa. Now, can the carpenter say that I will not give this, I will make something similar and give it to you? Let us say there is no breach of time, etc., which is stipulated under the contract. So therefore, here is a contract wherein I have placed an order for a sofa, and the carpenter is making the sofa using his own materials. At the end of it, he decides not to give that sofa to me. Then he starts on a new project and makes a different sofa. Ultimately, he makes a second sofa, gives it to me. That also meets all the specifications. He has complied with all the contractual terms in terms of price, delivery schedule, etc. So all those things are satisfied. Let us not worry about that. In this case, in the first sofa, did he have the right, though he made for me, did he have the right not to deliver it to me? The question to be asked is, property produced as a whole has individual existence and belongs to the transferor until delivery. So what it means is, a person may be working for you. He may be making several items. He may be manufacturing it based on your specification, etc. After he manufactures, if he can decide not to deliver it to you, that means he has ownership over the goods, because he has employed all his labor and materials. Momentarily, there is ownership which he has over those goods. Therefore, he can decide to give you or he can decide not to give you. If he decides to give you, the ownership is passed on the sofa, not on the wood which is used to make the sofa. So therefore, the carpenter, when he makes a sofa for you using his own materials, ultimately he makes a sofa. He remains the owner of the sofa. When he gives the sofa to you, he is selling the sofa to you. He is not selling the wood which is used in making the sofa. So that means this is a contract for sale of goods. Property produced as a whole has individual existence. Sofa exists and it belongs to the carpenter until delivery. In that case, title passes under a contract specific to sofa for an agreed price. Therefore, it will be a contract for sale of goods. The true effect of accretion has to be judged from the intention of the parties to the contract. Accretion cannot be presumed. On the other hand, you give some wood to him. On your wood, he makes the sofa. He uses the sofa material, cushion, all these things, etc. Then after he makes the sofa, he cannot say, he will not give the sofa to you, because by accretion, because wood is yours, you become the owner of everything which is incorporated on the wood and the sofa which is made. So in that case, the ownership is passed from the carpenter to you, not on the sofa itself, but only on the sofa material which he has used and he has incorporated into making the sofa. So that is the real difference. If the wood is yours and he makes the sofa and gives it to you, then it becomes a contract for work in which the ownership is passed only on the sofa material. But if everything is his, he can say that at the end of the, after making the sofa, he remains the owner of it. In that case, he is selling the sofa as sofa to you. That will be a contract for outright sale. Hindustan Aeronautics. This is again a Government of India contract. which is given. Actually, USR has given the contract to Indian government, and Indian government had subcontracted it to Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. It is for manufacturing and assembling of MiG. Now, whether the contract entered between Union of India and HAL, there is a subcontract agreement. Is it a contract for sale or contract of work? Was the issue. It was held that the primary test is to ascertain the main object of the parties, which can be gathered from the circumstances of the transaction. Invoice raised by HAL for supply and assembly consists of inputs, raw material cost, and labor. This is what I'm saying. HAL raised an invoice not for the MiG aircraft. He raised an invoice only for the inputs, raw material cost, and labor. Something like that with a split breakup, he has raised the invoice. However, when inputs and raw materials were imported by HAL, it was on account of GOI. So HAL is importing, but HAL has all along treated that the raw material which are imported never belonged to HAL. It was always belonging to the government, and HAL imported it on account of government. The cost towards material. So therefore, when the raw material always belonged to the government, when the parties intended that way, when the goods were imported on behalf of the government of India, on that raw material, when HAL does some activity, maybe incorporates its own materials also, then on the final MiG aircraft, it cannot be treated as a sale of aircraft. It is same as the SOFA example I was giving, because the principle here, namely the government, gives the raw materials. On government of India's raw materials, HAL may be incorporating some of its own materials also, but the ownership is not getting transferred on the aircraft itself. It is only getting transferred on that minuscule portion of the items which are added by HAL. Therefore, it becomes a contract for work and labor. It will not be a contract for outright sale. So, applying this principle, the Supreme Court held that there was no sale of goods. The HAL had no ownership over the raw materials or the finished goods. Next, I move to bodybuilding. So we have finished two kinds of contracts. Bodybuilding is very interesting. The first case on this, I would say not first case, the initial cases is Patnaik. In this, the appellant was contract to construct bus bodies on the chassis which is provided by government of Orissa. Terms also provides that completed bus bodies shall be delivered within the stipulated date. Please see this. Terms provided for completed bus bodies shall be delivered within the stipulated date. Bus bodies shall be constructed in the most substantial and workmanlike manner. Guarantee for the durability of body for 2 years from delivery. Whether the activity of bodybuilding on the chassis will be considered a contract of sale or works contract. So chassis belongs to the customer. Patnaik and company was expected to construct the bus body, and the completed bus body was to be delivered within the stipulated date, and that bus body should be delivered by affixing it on the chassis which is supplied by the customer. The court held mere transfer of property and goods used in performance of contract is not sufficient to constitute sale. That is, there may be transfer of property and goods. That is fine. That is not a test to see whether it is a sale or not. What should be seen is there must be an agreement, and in performance of that agreement, property belonging to the seller must stand transferred to the buyer for money consideration. So the contract should be for sale and of a specific item, and money should be paid for that. Even when a contract provides for fixing of a chattel to another chattel, there can be sale of goods with respect to former chattel. So therefore, I sell the goods to you. You tell me that yes, you give the goods to me, but just affix on the item which I have brought. So I affix on it and give it to you. Still there can be sale of goods. Bus bodies are throughout the contract spoken of as a unit or as a composite thing to be put on the chassis. Bus body never loses its character as movable goods, and the property in the bus body passed on to the government only at the time when the whole vehicle is delivered and not before that. So this is a classic example where the court went into the terms of the contract and held that in this agreement, what is agreed is body as such, as a complete unit. How it is delivered is a different matter. It may be delivered by affixation onto the chassis which is provided by the customer. That's a different matter. But what is agreed to be delivered is a body as a whole. Therefore, the court held that it will be treated as an outright sale and not as a works contract. while this said so, if you see Kailash Engineering was a case where this is again Supreme Court, though not mentioned here, it is of Supreme Court. It's a contract for building and erecting coach bodies on broad gauge underframes belonging to railways. As soon as the materials for coach building were taken to the customer site, ownership in the materials vested in the railways. Whether the activity of bodybuilding on the chassis will be considered a contract of sale or contract of work. Court noted the following points and they distinguished Patnaik case. What they said is, in this contract, it provides for construction, erection, and furnishing coach bodies on the underframe supplied and not for supply of coach bodies. See the distinction. In Patnaik case, it was agreed that I will supply you the body, bus body. In Kailash, the agreement was not to supply bus body or the coach body. Agreement was only for constructing, erecting, and furnishing coach bodies. So there is a distinction. So the end result is the same. End result is the bus body is supplied, here coach body is supplied. But in Patnaik, the agreement was to supply bus body as such. Bus body as such was identified as a commodity.
Sir, can you hear me now, sir?
Yes, Prithvi. Yes. Shall I continue?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Share the screen again. So I was on the distinguishing factors between Kailash and Patnaik. In Kailash, the contract was for the finished bus bodies that was spoken of as a commodity. But here in Kailash, they spoke about constructing, erecting, furnishing. Because of this distinction, the court distinguished Patnaik and held that in Kailash it is an activity for work and it is not a contract for sale. After this, after Kailash, another matter came up, which is TV Sundaramayangar. This is also again an agreement to construct bus bodies on the chassis supplied by government. Price agreed on per bus body basis. Bus body fitted with the chassis. It will be delivered to the customer within the stipulated time. Whether this body building is considered as sale or works contract. Court held only when the complete bus with the body fitted to the chassis was delivered to the customer that the property in the bus body passed. So they saw when the property is getting transferred. Property is getting transferred only after fitting the bus body onto the chassis. Property in the material used for bodybuilding always vested with the supplier, namely bodybuilder. The fact whether the body was built plank by plank or mounted as such on the chassis will not make any difference. So whether I make the bus body separately, I just lift it and just apply screws onto the chassis and fit it, or whether I build brick by brick on the chassis, that will not make any difference at all. What will make difference is what is being agreed upon and when the ownership is transferred. Distinguish Kailash, as in this case, ownership over the unfinished body vested with the assessee only. So here is another category. Here they say ownership over the unfinished body always vested with the supplier. So therefore, they only on finishing it gets transferred. So therefore, they held Kailash is not applicable in this case. So from all these things, what comes to the fore is this. The small differences in the way we agree, that makes all the difference. In fact, I remember someday in my earlier sessions, I was giving the example which was given in Benjamin on sale of goods, the treatise on sale of goods by Benjamin. There he was referring to a Roman example, an example usually given by the Roman lawyers. There he says a minute difference in the contract will change the essence of the contract itself. The example given there was, suppose there is a pond and pond has a lot of fishes and there is an angler, the fisherman sitting on the banks of the pond. I go to the fisherman and ask him to cast his net for me. So I ask him to cast his net. So he casts his net and I get some fishes. What is the nature of the contract? Here I have agreed that he will throw the net for me. So that's a contract for service. On the other hand, had I told the fisherman that whatever fish you get in your next catch, you have to sell it to me, then what happens is, by this slight change in the agreement, I change it into a contract for sale of future goods. I tell him that whatever fish you get in your next catch will be sold to me. So result is the same. In the first contract as also in the second contract, I get the same amount of fish. But in the first contract, I ask him to cast the net, which is a contract for service. In the second contract, I intend to buy the fish which he gets in his catch. So therefore, a sale contract, depending on the wording, it can be a sale contract or a service contract. So similarly here also, depending on how you word your agreement, we could clearly see between Patnaik and Kailash. Because of the slightly different wording, Kailash was held to be a contract for a service, and in Patnaik it was held to be a contract for sale of the bus body. So the way we enter into the agreement becomes extremely crucial. Printing contracts. This is a BC Kame is one of the earliest decisions on this point. And the respondent is the proprietor of Kame Photo Studio. After buying photography goods, he uses them in three ways. That is, in taking the photograph, he actually takes the photograph and he supplies the prints of it, or he will make the enlargement based on the negatives, whatever is supplied to him, or he will put the positive prints of the same size from the negatives brought. Appellant is charging lump sum price. He will not say so much for photography, so much for paper, so much for ink. He will not say all these things. He will say that I will charge so much amount. Whether this activity or supply of photo print is a contract for sale or is it a contract for work is the question. There the code holds. A photographer undertakes to take photograph, develop the negative, do etc. This cannot be said to be a contract for sale of goods. The contract is for use of skill and labor by the photograph and to bring out a DSA result. And what is also important is this, he also says the photography work preserves for the future what belongs and is part of the fleeting moment. It captures nostalgic memories of days which are not there anymore. So having held this, the code says that the paper, the ink, those are all incidental to the whole contract. The photographer is engaged for his skill of taking the photograph, developing, etc. Therefore, they held that it is for skill and labor and not for the supply of material. Anandam Vishwanathan is another important case, peculiar case. Here, the assessee was given a contract by education institutions for printing question papers. The content, of course, will be given by them, and he will be only printing it. Appellant in the invoice provided breakup for printing, blocks, packing, handling, etc. The question was whether this is a sale of question paper or whether it is a contract for work. Here it was held that printing of question paper is a delicate and confidential work, and the price is paid for supplying such printed question papers. It entails primarily confidence and secondly skill and very small measure the material. So mainly the confidentiality, then the skill of printing, and paper and ink is very incidental. Therefore, the court held that any case the question paper is not a commercial commodity because it cannot be sold. It is not supposed to be sold as such to anybody. So therefore, they said that from that angle also, this will not be treated as contract for sale of goods. It will at best be treated as a service contract. Everest copiers is another decision. Here it is photocopy. The first one was photography, BC Kame. Next is Anandam Vishwanathan, printing of question papers. Third one is photocopying. So here again, whether it is contract of photocopying activity, contract of sale or contract of service was the question. They relied on Kame case. They held that the main object of the work undertaken by the operator is not the transfer of the paper upon which the copy is produced. Object is to duplicate or make a Xerox copy of the document. The paper upon which duplication takes place is only incidental to its transaction. Therefore, the customer does not come to buy the bare paper. He wants the activity of duplication. Therefore, it is a contract for service. This was also held. With all these cases, then now we deal with what happened in the 46th Constitutional Amendment. First, there was a 61st Law Commission report. And this report, the purpose was to try to tax these activities and how to nullify the effect of Gann and Dunkerley, of course, prospectively. So the options that was available to the Law Commission was amend the whole entry in entry 54 and say include works contract also there, or introduce a fresh entry, not entry 54, introduce another entry and try to tax these work contract transactions and other transactions also. There were other 5 kinds of transactions which also they wanted to tax, like food supply or mutuality or hire purchase. So all these things they wanted to tax. So to introduce a separate entry in the list, or inserting in 366, which is the definition clause, a wide definition of sale so as to include works contract. These options were there, and the suggestion on inserting the definition of sale was accepted by the Constitution 46th Amendment, and Article 366 was amended. Along with it, Article 286 was also amended. 366 was amended insofar as it is relevant for works contract. It said this: a tax on transfer of property in goods. You can see this. This will take you back to the Australian amendment in the Section 3(4) of the Commonwealth Act, and also to the Madras General Sales Tax Amendment. Very similar to this, after so many years, the Constitution said, adopted the same phraseology and said, whether as goods or in some other form, involved in the execution of works contract. Why is this clause there? If you remember, the main ground on which Gann and Dunkerley was held, Gann and Dunkerley held that this cannot be taxed is twofold. Number one, the goods are not transferred in the form of goods as such. Second is, it is becoming part of immovable property. These are the two reasons. So goods not transferred in the form of goods, and then it is becoming part of immovable property. Now they say a transfer of property in goods, whether as goods, so whether goods can, even if sold as goods, or in some other form. So even if the transfer of property happens not in the form of goods but in a different form, then also it will be subjected to tax. Again, what will be subject to tax is only the transfer of property portion in the works contract. Please remember, works contract as such was not sought to be defined under Article 366. Only the clause relating to tax on sale or purchase of goods was inserted. There was no insertion with respect to the definition of works contract. That was left for the statutes to decide for themselves. This says whether such supply or is for cash, deferred payment, or other valuable consideration, and such transfer shall be deemed to be sale of those goods. Deemed to be sale of those goods. So very same goods. As Gann and Dunkerley said, the agreement cannot be transferred one, and property cannot get transferred in the other. So here they deem that it will be deemed as if the very same goods are sold, and then they made this amendment. We will come to Builders Association. Builders Association is with respect to the constitutional validity of the amendment which was made by the 46th Constitutional Amendment. And Builders Association discussion will also has to be continued along with the discussion on the second Gann and Dunkerley's case. I think this can be covered in the next session because it is technically post 46th Constitutional Amendment. As I said, I will deal today with the 46th Constitutional Amendment coming into force. So till that stage, we have completed so far. Now I am free to take questions. We will deal with this portion onwards in part 2. Thank you, Prithvi. Prithvi, I am stopping the sharing of screen. If there are any questions, you can pose it to me.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Uh, Participants, you can raise your hands in the app, or you can just send me a chat message. We can put up the questions to Raghavan, sir.
Sir, I'll unmute APS sir, sir. He wants to ask.
Yes.
APS sir.
Yes,
Good evening.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, sir.
My voice is.
Very audible.
Yes, sir. As stated in the topic itself, it's a tumultuous journey. Now we have just to begin the journey in one era. So originally the issue was the state sales tax department wanted to levy tax on the entire value. So therefore the issue was whether the service portion also can be levied under the on the whole value as a sales tax. So that's the dispute during the Gannon-Dunkerley regime.
Sir,
Then thereafter,
sorry to interfere here. Even that time,
Yes.
sir, even the Madras General Sales Tax Act in 1947, and in fact, even in Australia also, they tried to tax only the goods portion in the works contract. So far, they have not tried to tax the entire value of works contract. All along, the endeavor has been only to tax the goods portion in works contract.
yes, correct. Then with the introduction of Finance Act, then the dispute comes between who has to levy tax. So it's the second journey. Now we are in the third journey where both sales and service have been integrated. So far what we have taken, we have gone we have come across in sales tax subject. So that area now you covered. So you have yet to cover the service tax portion. Then the integration GST. So therefore you rightly titled as 3 parts. Am I correct, sir?
True, sir. Absolutely.
Yes.
In fact, the next part will be, as you rightly said, post-constitutional amendment, sales tax and service tax, and then GST coming as the last one. GST will have to be dealt with elaborately because that is the one which is current. So therefore, I felt one full session is required for GST. So therefore, that is the reason I thought in 3 parts, sir. You are right.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, we have Joseph Prabhakar sir. Next, I'll just unmute.
Yes, sir.
Joseph sir. Joseph sir. Wait, he's I'll unmute him again. Joseph sir, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
But thanks, Mr. Raghavan. Excellent, very well researched, as
Thank you, sir.
expected. This Gannon-Dunkerley examined Madras Sales Tax Act, that the provision where the sale stood enlarged in its scope to include work contract. But what about other decisions with a very, very basic doubt whether, because Hindustan Aeronautics and all that, they would have examined the respective state sales tax legislations. Those acts also had undergone the very same expansion, or it was with the plain and simple definition of sale?
No, sir. Those Hindustan Aeronautics stage and all were only plain and simple definition of sale.
It was only in Madras. It was the
Madras and Bombay also, if my recollection is right, I think Bombay also had it.
State tax were not amended.
Not in
It
similar
happened
fashion.
only after the 46th amendment.
Yes, sir. True.
Okay.
Which also took time till 2002 for CST to amend. So.
Yes. That is in 2002. Yes. Yeah. I'll reserve one last question.
Okay, sir.
Aparna ma'am wants to come in. I'll just. Aparna ma'am.
Yes, madam.
I don't have any question as such, but it was a fantastic presentation, need of the hour, because see how the, in fact, we are going to come, we have almost completed a full circle. What was once an indivisible contract, now again has become an indivisible contract. Now it comes under the, absolute thing called service. So it is a beautiful journey that you have started. We are with you, and we are waiting for the other parts also, because it is definitely going to give a beautiful understanding of how the law has evolved. It's very, very nice. Thank you very much for the journey that you have started.
Thank you for the encouragement, madam. Thank you.
Sir, we will. We have Ranganath sir. I'll just unmute him. Ranganath sir.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. My
You are not
question is-
visible though.
I don't think that matters. My question is, do you think is there some kind of a tension between the Carl Stein's GmbH judgment, that is the German company judgment, where the contract provided that property would pass as soon as they enter the factory gate, and the judgment in Kailash, which spoke of the bus body per se. In the first judgment, the court held that one free clause in the what should I say, contract shouldn't be construed, the intention should be seen. Applying that logic to Kailash, one would think that the distinction between the bus body and the chassis made in the contract was only to show that the bus body builder was not liable for any fault in the chassis. He is only liable, the warranty was only for the components of the bus body. And bus body can have no separate existence. It's not a movable property per se without the chassis. So do you see some kind of a tension there in the ratio between the two judgments?
So, of course, like we expect only good questions from you, difficult questions from you. But I would see like this, Rangnath. In Carl Still, there was an inherent contradiction within the body of the same contract. While one clause said that the ownership will be transferred to the customer, there was another contract which shifted the risk on the supplier itself. So therefore, these two clauses had to be reconciled then and there. And it has to be decided whether the ownership is passing on reaching the factory or ownership is passing only by way of accretion. So therefore, even I would say the common denominator is in both the cases, court went by the terms of the agreement only. In Carl Still, the only difference is they had to reconcile between these two clauses and then come to a conclusion based on the contract, which they did easily in Kailash because there was no contradictory clause. Therefore, in Kailash also they went by the contract. So be it Kailash, be it Patnaik, be it Carl Still, in all these three, court gave primary importance to the contract clauses only. The additional test, the additional difficulty was there in Carl Still because they had to reconcile between the apparent contradiction in two clauses. That is how I see it.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Balaji, sir.
Raghavan, my question is a little extension of what Rahul has asked. When the goods are typically in say turnkey contracts, the goods are provided first, and the person who is to do the eventual turnkey takes the delivery from the very buyer, who is the ultimate person who will take delivery of the entire project or buyer of the project. And he is responsible, the person who does the turnkey contract is responsible for the final product. But where does the divisibility apply? Is it at the stage when the material part is first sold and thereafter taken delivery for completing the turnkey, whether the property in goods transfers independently or at the end? What is the role of risk in this transfer of risk?
Okay. Sir, to start with, section 26 of the Sale of Goods Act says that risk only prima facie passes with property. So that is only unless the agreement is entered otherwise. So therefore, now, unlike the common law principle which was existent then, India made a departure from the common law principle and they incorporated section 26 where importance was given to the agreement. And they said risk is only a prima facie indication of transfer of ownership, not the conclusive evidence of transfer of ownership. This is first part. Therefore, risk is an indicator, but it is not conclusive. We have to keep that in mind. Keeping that in mind, the question which you have asked should be seen from two perspectives. One is, when does the transfer of ownership take place? Because transfer of ownership ideally should take place only at the time when it is agreed to be transferred. So therefore, this is again a creature of the agreement. So therefore, if the agreement says unambiguously the transfer of ownership takes place at X time period, legally it cannot be assumed that it gets transferred in Y time period. So that is not possible. So therefore, there again we have to clearly go by the agreement only. Having said so, The third part is divisibility. So assuming that the transfer of ownership takes place immediately on delivery of the goods, and then since the transfer of ownership happens immediately, the buyer will take delivery and the buyer reissues to the supplier for him to continue with his contract. I think that is the example you have given, where the supplier has to now continue with the next activities involved in the contract, namely erection, installation or construction, etc. Now in that case, what we have to see is whether the supply of goods and the services which one has to do using those goods, whether these are intertwined obligations or not. That is, if I can supply the goods and can I get can I treat that portion of the contract performed without recourse to the other portion of the contract which I have frustrated? Can that be seen as so? So the divisibility is with respect to the obligations. If delivering the goods itself is treated as performance of the obligation and independently I can still flout the service obligation, then it is divisible contract. But if I deliver the goods and I don't do the service, then if the service receiver can say, I will frustrate the entire contract, I will treat as if the entire contract is not performed, then these are intertwined obligations, in which case it will be treated as a single indivisible contract. So the test of divisibility flows from intertwined obligations. Once it is a single indivisible contract, then irrespective of the time when the transfer of ownership happens, it cannot be treated as outright sale. Once it is a single indivisible contract, in single indivisible contract, at some point in time, transfer of ownership will happen. But it cannot be equated to an outright sale transaction at all. So divisibility becomes crucial to determine whether it is outright sale or not.
Irrespective of the time of delivery.
Irrespective of time of delivery, because ownership has to pass at some point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, one last question from Joseph sir again, sir.
I think
Joseph
Mr. Shivanagesh, I see in the comments, Mr. Shivanagesh is wanting
He
to
wants to
ask
ask a
something.
question. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, is it? Sorry, I missed out on that problem. Mr. Shiva, I'll just unmute you. 1 minute. Shiva sir, you can ask your question.
Good evening, Mr. Raghavan.
Good evening, sir.
Excellent presentation. You have taken us back to the pre-GST era. It's like seeing an old movie flashback. So my question is...
Nice way of saying irrelevant.
No. That was not the real intention, but I really enjoyed the journey. Like when you see the old movies, your old memories are rekindled. So my question is, 46th Amendment added an entry by 36629A to tax the deemed sale of goods. Now, after the enactment of GST, the entry still exists. For whatever the wisdom of the legislators, the entry still exists. Having said so, the GST Act still treats every works contract as services. So my question is, don't you see there is a dichotomy between these two? And can an act have a deeming fiction which is overlapping the article of the Constitution?
Good question, sir. Good question. Sir, I would put it for my own convenience and clarity, I'll put it into two questions. Number one, why is this Article 3629A still continuing in the Constitution? And because of its continuation, is it hampering the scope and effect of Article 246A, where the GST is being levied under that?
Yeah.
Did I understand your question, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Very well.
Sir, this Article 36629A is continuing for two reasons. Entry 54 is not deleted in the state list.
Yes, sir.
Entry 54 still says tax on sale or purchase of goods, but goods is only restricted only to those 6 items.
Yes.
So therefore, what is meant by tax on sale or purchase of goods with respect to those items? We need to necessarily have a definition of tax on sale or purchase of goods under entry 36629A. This is one.
Fine.
Number two, entry 92A of list 1, which deals with CST, that has not been amended at all.
Okay.
Entry 92A, the application is also not so far curtailed in the constitution. One can say in the CST Act goods definition has been amended, but in the constitution it remains as it is, entry 92A. In other words, if the legislature tomorrow decides to levy CST also simultaneously along with GST, there is power. They have to only amend the CST Act to cover all goods. Entry 92A also still remains. So therefore, to understand entry 92A, not just with respect to these 6 items, namely alcohol, liquor, petroleum products, etc., but also to understand if it is given application to other goods. Because this phrase tax on sale or purchase of goods exists in 54 and 92A still, therefore the definition is also relevant still. Therefore, the 3629A has not been amended so far. This is number one. Number two, sir, insofar as the next question is concerned, whether there is a conflict or whether there is a overlap between GST and this, just because an entry remains in the constitution will not mean the power has been exercised and anything done. So ideally, I feel there is no overlap so far. So far, there is no overlap because CST Act applies only to such goods which are not covered under GST. 54 itself is amended only to cover those goods which are not covered under GST. So as such, the overlap is avoided through CST Act also. So there is no overlap.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
From constitution to entries itself, we cannot read the overlap.
Okay. Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Brilliant response, Raghavan. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
The question was very, very good and pertinent. Your reply was absolutely complete, and I mean, I have no words to this thing. You have explained it beautifully.
Thank you.
Joseph sir, before we take up your question, I will just unmute Jay Kumar sir. I think he has one question.
Yes, please.
Raghavan, and a small question when you mentioned about the sofa. Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir. Very much, sir. Yes.
You said if I give the wood and the carpenter does the labor, then it is works contract. And of course, my question is on GST. Supposing the carpenter gives me a stool free, GST will be in what amount and what product?
Sir, wood belongs to whom, sir?
Wood belongs to me. I give him the wood. He does the because you gave 2 examples before HALK.
Yes.
He is the owner of the wood. That is not the situation here. I give the wood, I give the design, I give the product, I give the, what I want. And he does that in the manner known to law, which according to you is a works contract and fairly right, absolutely. But supposing he says, sir, take one stool free, sir. He gives me a stool, which is, he is the owner of the stool technically. For GST, what is the value you will take for consideration?
Sir, there are other people in the session today who might disagree with me. But as an assessee counsel, I would definitely feel this is actually a free. I would say this amount which is given, the stool which is given, so long as it is truly gratuitous, it can never be subjected to sales tax. For the simple reason that it will amount to a sale only when there is a consideration which is there, which is in the form of cash, deferred payment, or other valuable consideration. So long as this tool which is given remains to be a gratuitous act where it is given free, or at best it can be treated as a discount in the service consideration, etc., that part of it cannot be taxed.
No, in GST definition of, I read somewhere that even with benefit, with no consideration, it can be subjected to GST.
So that is not between unrelated parties. Only between related parties it can happen. Actually, not with respect to unrelated parties. That schedule 1 is what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, if nobody has a question, then I'll ask one more question.
I see some question here from one Mr. Birendra Kumar Goyal.
Sir, actually, the
please,
problem
please.
is Mr. Birendra Kumar is audio is disconnected. I don't think
Okay.
he'll be able to talk.
Okay, but as I read it, the question is the sale of food notified as service under notification not in conflict with the provisions of
Yes, sir.
366(29)(a)? No, see, again, this is similar to what Mr. Shivanagesh asked. 3629A, if you read separately, it will cover all goods. But if you read it in light of entry 54, etc., then it will not cover all goods, it will only cover those 6 goods. And those 6 goods is not part of GST. So therefore, there is no conflict. That is again the same answer. We should not read 36620A alone. 36620A is a definition clause. We have to see where the term which is defined is employed. If you read that together, then there will be no conflict. Yes.
JK sir.
Yeah, I'll come inside. Raghavan,
yes, sir.
In my way, I have to tell you, I have to appreciate you means in one word. Before this session, I was, very skeptical. Why 3 sessions at the end of, the COVID lockdown?
Now you are clear that it's a mistake.
This should be on priority. We will finish this and then move to next. This transformation in 90 minutes you have given to me here. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
See, I don't know whether you have done this research for your PhD or for this group, but I have to tell you, it's a very, very honest research, a fantastic effort, and I salute for that.
Sir, in the first slide, I have given the credits actually. The team has worked well.
Fantastic. Okay. Now, you triggered a question to me. In fact, I think Balaji was touching upon that when he went to that stool. I don't know, it was Balaji who asked about the stool. See, that HAL case, he was saying that it was on account of the government of India. So it was always for the government. After SOFA, you went to that. My question would be, I give a contract for I don't give wood, I give a design. I give my design. And I also give an advance. Out of this advance, that guy, that carpenter is buying something. Now he's buying fine plywood, or whatever choices of leather, etc., etc. Based on my, say, 70% of advance, or even 100% advance. The contract is, the advance is totally linked to the exact materials, but definitely integrally connected to the contract. 100% advance I have given. Now, in this scenario, he makes a sofa. He buys his all materials, etc., etc. Can this be considered that the materials are procured on my account, and I can stake a claim on his first masterpiece? Or he has his own liberty to go ahead within the time frame of 30 days. He has the liberty to go for another sofa. Can I insist that no, first sofa is on my account when I have given him 100% advance? This is a question that you triggered me out of this.
Yes,
please.
Yes. Sir, yes, as you also rightly pointed out, as I also said, so long as he has complied with the terms of the agreement, he has not breached any of these things, you cannot say that you had me in mind when you procured the raw material, I had given you 100% advance, therefore I have an interest over the materials which you purchased. That you cannot claim. He can purchase, maybe you can also show from the currency note number also that your cash, the same currency was used by him to purchase his materials which ended up in the good sofa. All those things may be there, but he purchased the raw materials in his name and he was working on it. So therefore you don't acquire any interest over those raw materials or the sofa which is manufactured out of it. So long as he complies with the contractual terms, ultimately, etc., within time, etc., you can. Even if he breaches on the time delay, you cannot claim that therefore the first sofa is mine. You can have damages for breach, etc. But in no way you can claim the first sofa is mine. That you can do only if the raw materials were procured in your name, like what happened in HAL. Otherwise, merely because you gave the advance doesn't mean that you get an interest over the sofa.
Thank you, boss.
Thank you, sir.
Raghavan, if you permit me, can I just supplement to that SOFA issue?
Of course, sir. Of course.
The Sale of Goods Act categorizes goods into ascertained, unascertained, specific, and future. And as far as future goods are concerned, it is only at the time of appropriation to the contract
Correct.
sale will actually take place. So in the case of sofa, after you make it, you wanted a beautiful sofa, it turned out to be a splendid sofa. So when I want to appropriate, I refuse. I say I will not appropriate to Raghavan, I will keep it myself or I'll sell it to somebody. The appropriation never happens. So therefore, buyer can never demand that that sofa should be handed over to him.
The fact that you use the advance to buy, will it amount
It's
to
not a
an
criterion.
appropriation?
Exactly. That is not the
It
criterion.
will not. It will not. Very good. Thank you, sir. Yes.
Raghavan, I have this basic doubt on that bodybuilding.
Yes, sir.
Per se, in the trade parlance, we understand that the chassis is given and the materials are supplied or probably supplied and bought. And then when the body is built, as far as the bodybuilder is concerned, he may build the body. But as far as the thing is concerned, the chattel is concerned, the chattel undergoes a transformation from the chassis to the bus. Therefore, there is never an identity of the body coming into emergence as bus body, never ever. So therefore,
Sir, it seems, sir, this doubt
the
I had.
contract may have had some clauses which are not practical or probably not workable. So should the court have gone into the, into something which is impractical, and should that there happened a sale of bus body in that case, somehow if government is not probably laying down. Anyway, it is just for academic.
For what, when this doubt came to me, sir, I was told that bus body as such exists. And it seems in Meerut, etc., you can go to the bodybuilder and then say, I have this. This is the model number of the chassis which I have. Give me the body. He will give you options. You can just see the built-in body. You just have to go and choose. Then they will just place and give it to you. They said it is possible.
Okay. That means bus body is built separately and kept.
With the model number, sir, you said Tata so-and-so vehicle model. It seems they build the body itself and keep it.
Oh, I see. Everything is done.
Yes. This I was told, when I was in Delhi, the doubt I had a few years back. When I asked, I was told that in Meerut, this is a separate business actually. There are bodybuilders who does only this manufacture. Keep it ready. You can just go buy it and come.
Oh, I see.
Video.
So, if you by mistake give some other model number, and if they are already fitted, you get a call, it is different model number, then they will put another one. So easy.
Yes, they have the model number perfectly.
Then the decision is perfectly the same. So I thought bodybuilding means it just like a brick on brick, it has to build like.
It seems it is not always like that.
Always, okay. Then I think it is fair enough. So I don't think, anyway, I just on the lighter note, I thought I'll ask you one more question. The last question, you said you're procuring a lot of fish. I'm sure you would have used sanitizer and...
Nothing, only to put it back into the pond, sir.
And I'm sure you would have probably acted as a pure agent. Your entry for consumption or use would have been prohibited. So, whether there was a furtherance of business and disposed.
Nothing. You finally stumped me.
No, it was a wonderful presentation. As JK said, I am sure one cannot speak unless you have spent days and days on it. It is not a joke. It's been excellent. Hats off to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Srinivas, sir?
Yes, sir. I just want to say one announcement. All of us, we know yesterday Senior Counsel Mr. S.V. Jayaraman passed away, and we thought of having a reference for him. And then we realized that after the cremation only we can have reference. So yesterday he was cremated. So I will say briefly about him. I have direct interaction with him. He's regularly appearing on civil appellate side. So he's regularly sitting, he'll be in MHA association and patronage all junior advocates. The one thing about him is he will give much fees to the juniors whoever engages him. That's a peculiar thing with him. You might have seen all of the postings in various groups about that. Everybody has told that he has given this much money, this much amount, and all. That way he has patronaged all the juniors. Without any hesitation, we can go and engage him. We can discuss with on any issues in civil side and all. And he is also author of one journal. It's TNLJ, Tamil Nadu Law Notes Journal, I remember. So in honor of him, let us observe 2 minutes silence, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Srinivas sir. We pray for the departed soul. So, thank you once again to all the participants today, and thank you, Raghavan sir, for your stage one of this elaborate topic. As JK sir has rightly put it, we will try to keep this as early as possible so that we can complete on this topic very soon. And to all the participants, if you have not been able to attend the session completely, you can. We will be uploading this session on YouTube in our channel very soon. So you can subscribe to our channel. Our channel is called Madras Tax Bar Chennai. So you can subscribe to it. We have already uploaded most of our webinars in that. Even this will be uploaded very soon. So I request all of you to have a look at that, and then you can always access to this session anytime. So thank you very much once again. Tomorrow's meeting details will be shared with all of you shortly. Thank you. Have a good night.
I just want to thank all of you, and it was. I'm happy that all stalwarts participated. Didn't discount as a normal session, so I'm thankful that you all spent your time here. And I'm sorry for the interruptions that happened. I will try to somehow overcome that. Let me work on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Nitin has shared the YouTube channel link, so you can get access to our channel through that link and subscribe to it. Thank you very much once again. Thank you, Raghavan sir. Thank you to all the members of Madras Tax Bar, and thank you to all the participants. Have a good night and stay safe. I'll end the meeting.